Jai Janendra, and welcome to Arihanta Institute's Voices in Compassion Studies speaker series. The Compassion Studies Initiative at Arihanta Institute brings together leading scholars, educators, and thought leaders from Jain studies, and related fields to explore how we can all live more compassionate lives. In a world that often feels divided and uncertain, CSI at AI focuses on fostering human-to-human compassion in action as a powerful response to our most pressing challenges. We're delighted to host Anna Halafoff today, Associate Professor in Sociology of Religion and Religious Studies at Deakin University in Australia, for her talk, Buddhist Compassion, Rest, Non-Action, and Responsibility. I'm Deanna Hewlett, the Academic Project Coordinator and a graduate student here at Arihanta Institute. And today I'm co-hosting alongside our Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Christopher Jane Miller. Dr. Halafoff's presentation will go for approximately 35 to 40 minutes, and afterwards Dr. Miller will moderate our Q&A discussion. The Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen will be open throughout, so please ask your questions as they come up, and we'll prompt you in the later part of her presentation. And we at Arihanta Institute would like to thank the Ubroy Foundation for their generous support in our work this year in the Compassion Studies Initiative. We hope that you enjoy Professor Halafoff's presentation, and I will now pass it on to Professor Miller.
Thank you, Deanna, for kicking us off as usual, and this is our last event in the Compassion Studies Initiative for this year. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Anna Halafoff, who's the Associate Professor in Sociology of Religion and Religious Studies at Deakin University, Australia. Her research expertise includes spirituality, Buddhism, religious diversity, and interreligious relations. Her current major projects are on Buddhism in Australia, belonging, wellbeing and social engagement, and on spirituality in Australia, wellness, wellbeing, and risks. Anna's most recent books are on Freedom, Faiths, and Futures, Teenage Australians on Religion, Sexuality, and Diversity, published with Bloomsbury in 2021, and on Religious Diversity in Australia, Living Well with Difference, published by Bloomsbury in 2024. She is also a qualified yoga and meditation teacher and has practiced both for over 35 years, and mainly in Tibetan Buddhist traditions. And having read Anna's bio, I will also just say that I so deeply appreciate that she's agreed to work with us here on the Compassion Studies Initiative, which was sponsored by the Ubroy Foundation. The first part of the initiative has really covered various dimensions of compassion in the Jain tradition that we teach so deeply here at Arihanta Institute. And the second part of the Compassion Studies Initiative was also to introduce our students to other Dharma traditions so they could see the connections with the Jain tradition, which I'm sure many in the audience will notice in the presentation today. And so I'm so delighted because we've worked on other projects together, including a recent scholar practitioner project together, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Anna Halafoff to the stage. Anna, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you also, Diana. I'm so delighted to be here and to be part of this Compassion series. So I'm just going to share my slides. Okay, so as I said, I'm really delighted to be part of this Compassion series. And today's talk, we're going to focus on Buddhist compassion, rest, non-action, and responsibility. Okay, all good?
Looks perfect, yep.
Great. All right, so compassion is a central Buddhist principle extended to all life forms, including oneself. And this presentation will explore Buddhist understandings of compassion with a particular emphasis on Dzogchen Buddhism. And compassion can be cultivated or arise spontaneously, given it is a quality of what is known as Buddha nature, or the underlying natural state. So today I'm going to be discussing Dzogchen's emphasis on rest, non-action, and compassionate responsibility. and implications that this may have for social and environmental justice, both on and off the meditation cushion. So while there are numerous Buddhisms and significant variation among them, there are some core teachings of the Buddha, who lived around the 5th century BCE, that are shared, notably teachings on wisdom and compassion. So what are these common Buddhist understandings, and how are they interrelated? And also, how did this particular Buddha arrive at these understandings? So very briefly, the young Buddha was a prince who had a privileged childhood and adolescence, and only as a young man, when he dared to venture beyond his palace's walls, did he first witness human suffering of old age, sickness, death, and grief. And moved by this suffering and how to be free from it, he set out to leave his previous comforts and to live the life of a holy man. And the Buddha awakened under a tree, which I find highly significant, and then taught the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path out of a deep compassion, defined as the wish for all beings to be free of suffering. So I'm drawing here from The Lion's Roar, a very well-known Buddhist publication on the Four Noble Truths. So the first Noble Truth explains how suffering, dukkha, is a pervasive part of the human condition. And the second truth, focused on the cause of suffering, identifies that it is actually an illusion, this misperception that things, people, or ourselves are somehow permanent and separate. When we believe this, then that is how the suffering is produced. So, in fact, according to the Buddha, the nature of reality is impermanent and interdependent, as nothing or no one is individual or separate, and everything is changing. There is no separate I or any sense really of us and them. And the moment that we realize this, loving kindness and compassion also naturally begins to arise within us. For how could we possibly want to harm any living being when we realize that they are not actually at all separate from ourselves? So knowing this is wisdom, and moreover, realizing that our own ignorance, our own suffering is also impermanent and passing like clouds across the sky, is also really liberating. So knowing that these clouds of misperception merely temporarily obscure our true enlightened, blissful, peaceful, and compassionate nature, which is in fact omnipresent and the ground of all being, is the third noble truth, which can lead then to the cessation, to the end of suffering. So the fourth noble truth describes the path, the way to our own and others' enlightenment and liberation from this suffering. So this path in Buddhism is described as eightfold. And the first one is right view. And so the right view is of these four noble truths that we've just learned and discussed. And also the second is significant, is this right resolve to want to cultivate compassion, to reduce suffering, and to renounce causing any harm through the right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So these ethical stances and practices are what, according to Buddhism, can lead to enlightenment. So Buddhism significantly also teaches us equanimity, that all beings are equal in our wish to be happy and wish to be free from suffering. And so love in Buddhism is said to be this wish for all beings to be happy. And compassion is defined then as the wish for all beings to be free from suffering and pain. And so that's how it loops back to wisdom, that we can be free from suffering when we realize the Four Noble Truths and realize particularly the impermanence of our delusions and our separate, small, egoic, false selves, and realize our underlying independent, compassionate, peaceful, and blissful, true Buddha nature, or for those of you with a more secular view, our true natural state. So the teachings of the Buddha, which is also known as the Dharma, is the realization, culminates in the realization of this wisdom. And they're viewed as an antidote to suffering. And so the ultimate compassionate act is the wish to share this wisdom, to share these teachings with others, to then be able to liberate them from their suffering as well. So as the Buddha awakened to this wisdom, sitting under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, the compassion that awakened within him led him to teach and share this wisdom with a wish to benefit everyone. And Buddha's pupils, including his former wife, Yasodhara, and his aunt who raised him, went on to become teachers, inspired also by their heart-mind awakenings. They stepped away from worldly distractions and committed to leading virtuous lives, teaching the Dharma for the benefit of all, as do many Buddhist teachers from diverse traditions to this day. So these teachings also involve various meditation practices aimed at stilling the mind and opening the heart. And so we're going to explore some of these teachings and practices in more detail in our course, on the course that I'm taking within this broader syllabus on Buddhism, non-action, and compassionate responsibility. And in this course, we're going to focus on 4 topics: compassion in Buddhism, Buddhist practices of compassion, so focused very much here on meditation, and then Buddhist compassionate acts and activism, which talk about connections between Buddhism and social and environmental justice and activism. And then finally, the 4th class, Dzogchen Buddhism, non-action and compassionate responsibility. And we're going to discover a little bit more about non-action and why I choose to bracket the non in non-action in the rest of my talk today, which is going to focus more on Dzogchen Buddhism, which is the tradition that I have been deeply immersed in over the past 10 years. So around 35 years ago, in the late 1980s, when I was just shy of 20, I had an unexpected, spontaneous, spiritual experience, but actually in a very mundane setting with no prior meditation training at all. I suddenly found myself enveloped in this sense of bliss and peace that was just completely beyond words. It did happen at a time of shattering grief following the sudden death of a very close family member. And so amidst a lot of pain that I and our loved ones were experiencing. So it was at once deeply comforting, this experience, but also profoundly unsettling, as it propelled me to leave my urban life and ambitions and undertake a spiritual quest up the east coast of Australia to the alternative Northern Rivers region of Byron Bay and Nimbin, and then to the Daintree rainforest, where I lived and meditated in for 2 years, and where I have been very fortunate to return to regularly since. So this bliss and peace that I spontaneously experienced at this very young age was so different to anything that I had ever known before. And I really needed to understand what it was about And more so, I really wanted to be able to revisit it. So I began to read many profound religious, yogic, and Buddhist texts. And I was, again, very fortunate to be able to study with highly respected spiritual teachers, and yogic and Buddhist masters, and from, diverse traditions. So I learned about the Four Noble Truths, and that really helped me to understand this sense of bliss and peace more, these glimpses of what they call samadhi, this nature of reality, through meditation. And I must say, most often, spending time in nature. So about 10 years ago, I first read this wonderful book, The Precious Treasury of the Basic Space of Phenomena by Longchen Rabjam, who is affectionately known as Longchenpa. He is arguably the most revered scholar and practitioner of the so-called Great Perfection or Dzogchen teachings, who lived in Tibet and Bhutan in the 14th century. And while Longchenpa is widely respected, his later texts, including this book, are seen by some as pretty radical and controversial, given their emphasis is on spontaneous awakening through effortless ease. So the precious treasury of the basic space of phenomena is one of Longchenpa's 7 treasuries, known as the Great Perfection teachings. And reading this text just had a profound impact on me. And following its instructions, I ceased all of my previous more ritualized practices and began studying it in depth, and also its commentaries. And non-practicing Longchenpa's Treksho, as it's called, non-meditation, guided also by Keith Dowman's radical Dzogchen instructions. So Dowman states that these Dzogchen practices, particularly Treksho, this breakthrough practice of simply sitting, is the best form of non-meditation for our current times. And that the basic space of phenomena's quote, clarity in pointing out the natural great perfection of reality is unsurpassed. So my understandings have also more recently been very much enriched by reading 2 PhD theses by Giri Erfagan and Adam Lobel, both on Longchenpa, and particularly Lobel's insights on compassionate responsiveness. So I will share some of these insights with you now, quoting mainly from the Padma Publishing Richard Barron 2001 translation of Longchenpa's Precious Treasury of the Basic Space of Phenomena, both its source slides, and I'll also draw on insights from its commentary. So the Great Perfection Dzogchen teachings combine Nyingma Tibetan Buddhist ideas derived from Indian, Chinese, and Korean Buddhism with indigenous-born Tibetan traditions. Dzogchen teachings first emerged in the 8th century in Tibet, revealed by Garab Dorje, who was the first Dzogchen master. There he is on the screen. So Tantric Great Yoga and the Dzogchen Great Perfection teachings were intertwined in this early period, and there's ongoing debate regarding how interwoven they continue to be to this day. Some renowned scholars and practitioners, well, most actually, argue that the Dzogchen view is there to inspire the gradual path of tantric practice and ritual, while others, the minority, including me, believe that the Great Perfection teachings, and particularly the latter works of Longchenpa, reveal a more radical Dzogchen view of non-action and spontaneous realization, inspired by the 8th century Chinese master Mohiyan and the early Dzogchen teachings. So as Lobel explains, the early Great Perfection Dzogchen texts, known as the Mind series from the 8th to 10th centuries, emphasize a radical rejection of complex tantric ritual and techniques, favoring instead a rhetoric of simplicity, naturalness, and absence of all effort. This is underpinned by, quote, unwavering commitment to the ontological perfection and goodness of all being, embodied in the primordial blue Buddha named the All-Good. And this all good, what's also called the natural state, is equated with the nature of mind, which is innately pure, knowing, spontaneous, and luminous. Instead of effort and structured techniques, these early Dzogchen teachings explain how this all-good reality is simply always there as the underlying natural state of ourselves, of all beings, and of the entire state of the world, and will simply and spontaneously manifest when the striving and doing and struggle are released. So these Mind series texts include the root tantra of the all-knowing monarch, which very much inspired Longchenpa's basic space of phenomena. So Longchenpa learned the great perfection teachings from his father, the famous Tibetan Samye Monastery and Sangpa University, before he turned away from scholastic institutional Tibetan Buddhism towards a more radical solitary practice of non-meditation and retreat in nature, in mountains, forests, and caves. And Longchenpa lived and studied with the great perfection teacher Kumaradza Gyalpo for 3 years, who shared the Dzogchen Mind series teachings with him during this very special time. And Longchenpa eventually settled in his own retreat encampment at White Skull Mountain in Tibet, where he lived at times in a solitary cave and wrote many of his great works. He was forced into exile in Bhutan in 1354 as a result of Tibetan clan rivalries, and was there in a place that was ideal for spiritual retreat. And it's here where Longchenpa is believed to have written most, or at least some, of this precious treasury of the basic space of phenomena, and also the Way of Abiding, which are proposed to be his final 2 texts, and the pinnacle, really, of his prolific teachings. And Longchenpa returned to Tibet, to White Skull Mountain, and in 1360, and died there around 1364 at age 56. So it's there that he's thought to have finished these great texts and also their commentary. So Longchenpa was, as Erfagun stresses, a living embodiment of Dzogchen pedagogy, given his preference for non-institutional Buddhism and non-material retreat in the forests, mountains, and caves, and a recurring theme in his body of work. And I would add here, and drawing also on Lobel, that Longchenpa's commitment to teach the Dharma as evidenced by his prolific works, and notably his radical Dzogchen view, makes him also an embodiment of this compassionate responsiveness, alongside all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas before and after him. And I will return to explain this in more detail later. So now we're going to turn to some of the verses of this beautiful book itself. And really, this can be a meditation practice in itself, just to listen to this wonderful poetry and wonderful teachings. So this 14th century Dzogchen teacher entreats us at the beginning of the Precious Treasury. He shares with us how naturally occurring timeless awareness, the utterly lucid awakened mind, is something marvelous and superb, primordially and spontaneously present. It is the treasury from which comes the universe of appearances and possibilities, whether of samsara or nirvana. Homage to that unwavering state, free of elaboration, the very pinnacle of spiritual approaches, the expanse in which the sun and moon orbit the most majestic mountain, is the experience of the Vajra heart essence, spontaneously present and utterly lucid, the expanse of the naturally settled state that entails no effort or achievement. Listen as I explain this superb, timelessly infinite expanse. So the great perfection described by Longchenpa as the natural state is ultimately ineffable and beyond limited human concepts. This poetic text has been compared to the Tao Te Ching, which similarly describes the Tao as that which cannot be named. Longchenpa, however, does use terms throughout the basic space of phenomena to describe the qualities of the nature of awakened mind as primordially pure, supreme bliss, and a spacious, pristine, utterly lucid, wholly positive state. And he does so by drawing on the early Dzogchen text described in detail in his commentary. So Longchenpa states of the great perfection, given that everything is wholly positive, arising as a single state of spontaneous presence, that which is sublime and without rival, the greatest of the great, within which everything without exception is subsumed, is the wholly positive basic space of phenomena. And this blissful, sublime heart essence is the ground of being, naturally occurring, timeless awareness. So spontaneous realization of this innermost heart essence is what Longchenpa calls in his commentary the heart drop. So all beings, the natural world, everything animate or inanimate comes from this great perfection. It is and goes back to it, and it's timeless, and we are never actually separate from it. So this aligns with what we learnt previously as the third noble truth. So Longchenpa describes this true nature of phenomena as suchness. It involves no effort or achievement or anything needing to be done. In fact, according to Longchenpa, effort and striving can actually impede the realization of this natural state. So instead, Longchenpa emphasizes rest and non-action. And he states in these beautiful poetic verses that I will share with you now, that within mind itself, the essence of awakened mind, there is no view to cultivate in meditation, no conduct to undertake, no fruition to achieve, no levels of realization or paths to traverse, no mandala to visualize, no recitation, repetition, or stage of completion, no empowerment to be bestowed, and no samaya, no rules, vows to uphold. In the pure state that is the true nature of phenomena, timelessly and spontaneously present, such adventitious factors of developmental effort and causality are transcended. In the pure state that is the true nature of phenomena, timelessly and spontaneously present. Oh, sorry, that one's repeated. The supreme teaching involves no concerted effort to accept or reject. Naturally occurring timeless awareness, the essence of awakened mind itself, is made fully evident in that one does not waver from the direct experience of it. So there is no need to strive for it elsewhere. It rests in and of itself. So do not seek it elsewhere. This, the ultimate meaning of suchness itself, is like the essence of the sun. I hold that it abides in a natural state of rest, unwavering, utter lucidity. It can be shown that other approaches are like attempts to create the already present sun, by dispelling clouds and darkness through a process of effort and achievement. The transmission of supreme yoga, the sublime secret of Ati, is that of resting in genuine being, just as it is, naturally occurring timeless awareness, within the spacious state in which there is no distinction between self and other. Perfection in one, perfection in everything. The expanse within which all phenomena are subsumed is itself subsumed within the supreme state of spontaneous presence, a timeless and naturally lucid state of utter relaxation. And he adds that given this state of infinite evenness, open, relaxed, and spacious, there is no sense of spiritual practice, for there is no distinction between formal sessions and the periods in between. Everything is unrestricted, completely equal, and uninterrupted. Thick clouds vanish naturally when left alone in the sky. Similarly, the clouds of causality vanish without effort or striving, and the very essence of enlightenment shines in and of itself in the vault of the sky. So, as we discussed earlier in the presentation in relation to the third noble truth, Longchenpa is explaining here that the all good is ultimately real and that everything else is ephemeral and passing. And Longchenpa therefore advises, with regards to life and also of non-meditation, to simply do this practice. Let whatever happens happen, and whatever manifests manifest. Let whatever occurs occur, and whatever is be. Let whatever is anything at all be nothing at all. And he further explains how this vast expanse, unwavering, indescribable, and equal to space, is timelessly and innately present in all beings. And that when we're on the meditation cushion or out in the world, thoughts arise, abide, and are freed, and their simultaneous arising and being freed is uninterrupted. And we can see that with our mind. Thoughts come and they go. They simply pass if we don't grasp or hold on to them. So the experience of blending with space without any division into outer and inner or in between arises in meditative absorption that is blissful, clear, and free of elaboration. So this radical Treksho non-meditation practice or non-practice thereby involves just simply sitting with your eyes open, often in Dzogchen, in a lucid state, letting both difficult and positive emotions, thoughts and memories simply come and go, simply arise and dissolve in a naturally resting and even state. So Longchenpa instructs us that when something unwanted falls into your lap and you have a negative reaction, so this can be in meditation or again, just in your everyday life. When something unwanted falls into your lap and you have a negative reaction, such as anger, dislike, envy, upset, irritation, anxiety, depression, mental anguish, or fear of death and rebirth, when such reactions arise as a display due to dynamic energy, just simply identify them as such. Do not renounce them, indulge in them, refine them away, transform them, look at them, or even meditate on them. Rather, rest spontaneously in the single naturally settled state of evenness, free of the proliferation and resolution of conceptual frameworks, and mind as a pure expanse of space in which things vanish naturally and leave no trace, arises with intensity from within, pristinely lucid. So, as Longchenpa explains here, this non-meditation does not have to be restricted, as I said, to any specific meditative sitting practice, but can be undertaken also in any ordinary moment, day or night, when thoughts, memories, dreams, reflections arise, just resting in whatever is a comfortable position and letting your thoughts simply come and naturally go. He further counsels, mind as a pure expanse of space in which things vanish naturally and leave no trace, arises with intensity from within, pristinely lucid. So coming to near the end of my presentation now, the point here is that this process of thoughts arising and dissolving is completely natural. There's nothing we actually have to do but simply rest in the natural state and let the thoughts come and go, and naturally be liberated from them, and therefore naturally be liberated from our suffering. It's also of particular importance to know that compassionate responsiveness is one of the main qualities of this all-good natural state, and that the all-good is not passive, it is dynamic. And so as thoughts are naturally arising, so is this compassionate capability within us to be focused on the abundant benefits of all beings. And at the end of Longchenpa's precious treasury, this beautiful book, The Space of Phenomena, he explains how, since the display of responsiveness is immeasurable throughout the 10 directions, emanations issue forth to ensure total benefit for beings. Enlightened actions are revealed for as long as samsara lasts. This is impartial responsiveness, dynamic energy arising from the naturally settled essence of being, so that through its display there is abundant benefit for others. So this is evident, this compassionate responsiveness, in the manifestation of teachers and more than human beings that guide us to these realizations of this natural state. So Lobel states that therefore this compassionate responsiveness is ethical and that spontaneity is ethical. And Lobel himself poetically concludes that, quote, Longchenpa's practical ethics is therefore an effortless way of being that cares for all beings by allowing everything to be. So moreover, when instructed by Longchenpa to simply rest, undistracted in one's natural state, our innate, dynamic, compassionate, and loving kind qualities will naturally arise and guide our actions to care for all beings. So this is explained and evidenced in Longchenpa's poetry and the example of his own life, often spent in retreat in nature. And the basic space of phenomena ends with Longchenpa sharing his heartfelt wisdom with a wish to benefit all beings, not just humans. He concludes, by this virtue, may all beings without exception effortlessly reach the primordial ground. In all directions, may there be well-being, splendor, and wealth, so that everything that is wished for is spontaneously accomplished as though in a pure realm. May the drum of spiritual teachings resound and the victory banner of liberation be raised. May the sacred teachings never wane, but spread and flourish. Good fortune, good fortune, good fortune. So in summation, and somewhat provocatively, what I would like to stress here is that Longchenpa's own life and teachings were no doubt inspired by his time spent in retreat in nature, and that the basic space of phenomena includes many nature metaphors derived from the early Dzogchen and indigenous Bon nature-based traditions. So Buddha himself was enlightened, as we said earlier, under a tree, which is an often overlooked point. And I argue here, following Longchenpa's own call to go to the peaceful wildwoods, that they themselves can teach us the insights of radical Dzogchen, and that nature itself is pointing out this wisdom to us all the time. So this non-action of compassionate responsiveness is indeed profoundly revealed in poetic teachings of the Buddhas, but also spending time alone in nature, resting in ease. So we can simply rest and let whatever arises dissolve into the compassionate ground of being. And this is also a very practical, compassionate technique of non-meditation that can help us to release any of our own negative emotions. And we go into this in more detail in the course, the 4-week course or 4-module course on compassion and Buddhism. And as we do this practice, and that kind of wish, that compassionate wish naturally arises within us, that might take a more kind of active form, commitment to social or environmental justice, commitment to work for a world that's free of suffering and injustices. And Longchenpa's non-action of Treksho, non-meditation, retreating in nature, these more contemplative practices and writing poetry, pointing this wisdom out to others, is actually also another form of compassionate non-action. And I bracket the non in non-action here, as it may appear to be less active, given its emphasis on rest and non-doing, but is nonetheless dynamic and equally awakening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that very wonderful and clear presentation and opportunity to listen to even some wonderful verses from the tradition that you practice in and are so intimately familiar with. I also have to reflect and say how much nature is a catalyst for my own experience, and I really connect with that, as well as I'm sure many of our audience members do. And so I welcome the audience to put questions in the Q&A if you like. I also have some questions that I'm sure will be generative for some interesting discussion. And one of those, and I know you and I have talked about this, Anna, before, I think in the podcast interview I did with you in the lead up to you producing your class and being part of the Compassion Studies Initiative, which is that so much in Jain studies and so much in yoga studies, in the fields that I tend to be more engaged in, we see this tension between individual self-care, individual, sometimes often escape from the world, built and baked into some of these traditions, but then also, of course, some kind of ethical engagement with the world. And so often we have these discussions around spirituality as a potential escape from the world versus should we be engaged with the world. And I see very much in your presentation with the, as you said, the brackets that you put around non next to action, we see this tension playing itself out. And so I guess one of my questions is, and I think you started to answer it there towards the end, was how a kind of Buddhist response might be given our current political moment, our polarization, the world that we live in. What is the ethical response that we might think about that comes out of this practice of non-practice, if you want to put it that way? And yeah, and feel free to fill in any kind of nuance here, but I do see that same tension playing itself out of rest and also being active. And so I'm kind of curious to hear more about what a Buddhist response to today's world might be with many of the things we have going on.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I agree with you. I think sometimes there's a critique can be labeled at Buddhism. Well, first, that it's just too preoccupied with suffering, or that it also, because of that kind of emphasis on contemplative practice and retreat, that there's a misperception then that it's equated with kind of, withdrawing from the world and maybe not really being engaged enough socially. But there are many traditions and current traditions too of socially engaged Buddhism. So my course does go into more detail about that. And I think just in a nutshell, because again, these are things that are widely discussed and debated, I do actually think the current state of the world, we are in what I would say is a crisis of compassion. So that ignorance is kind of pervasive, that we are these separate selves. And so that can lead to self-centeredness and self-grasping. And then this extension of, it's not just about the self, it becomes this kind of us and them mentality where we see ourselves as kind of really only aligned with like-minded others. We see it in a rise of kind of religious nationalism even throughout the world. So I think the Buddhist view, even within the Four Noble Truths, can really help break that apart a little bit in terms of just breaking that false solidity about me being a separate me or me being part of a separate us versus a separate them. The Buddhist view helps you to understand that actually we are all interrelated and all interconnected. And also, as we learned from these beautiful verses, we are kind of essentially good and we are essentially kind and we are essentially loving and we are essentially compassionate towards others when those illusions of self grasping can be dissolved. So there's some sort of antidotes there in terms of how to see yourself and see the world. And then in terms of practice or non-practice, I think the meditation practices or the non-meditation practices in Buddhism are extremely helpful for processing the difficulties that are happening, that we have to face on a personal level, but also on a global level. And we talk about this a lot in the second week of the course. There are practices of Tonglen, there are compassion practices that we can do for ourselves, but also for others, and even for conflict zones, war zones. So that that compassion really remains open and doesn't just turn inward into a just looking after myself on my mat and on my cushion, but that no, I have this innate ability to also do practices for the benefit of others. There's a reading we look at from Anne Glegg that talks about, Buddha, when he went out into the world, he saw these sufferings of old age, sickness, and death. And what she says is really what we should add in there is the suffering of injustice. And so as Buddhists, with that wellspring of compassion within us, of course, we would want the world to be a more fairer, a more just, and a more peaceful place. So again, through doing the practices on ourselves, but also doing practices where we can dedicate any of that bliss, any of that peace, any of that happiness out to others, they're actually very powerful practices that you can do out in the world to address injustices, and also for environmental activism, but that you can also do while you're sitting or writing poetry or sharing these wisdoms and these knowledges through creative means such as art or music, other things that can also be really of benefit to humans and help settle us in times of really Buddhism calls it like degenerate times. They call, where there may be parallels in the Jain tradition, we're at the beginning of a time where things are likely to, unfortunately, at least appear to be getting much worse. And so, again, it's really important that we have practices that help us to process that difficulty and also to try and help other beings as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm so convinced after talking to you and seeing your course and seeing your syllabus and hearing your podcast and hearing you now that there is something powerful about this practice of self-care in Buddhism, whatever you want to call it, of going inward, if one is mindful of the fact that they are still in this kind of interconnected world. But it seems that that is the kind of natural outcome of this practice, in fact. And I find that to be a very compelling way of thinking about this as a very engaged practice with the world, even though it may appear at times to be withdrawn. It actually reconnects people to a part of themselves as well as to others in ways that are profound and might not otherwise happen. And so I've really taken that away from your class, and I really appreciate that so much. We had a question actually from one of our graduate students, Agni, who has written that you mentioned your work with teenagers in Australia. So this was from your bio as well. What aspects of these teachings are you finding that young people are responding to? What are they sharing? Are they engaging with these practices in different ways?
Thank you. It's a really great question. Yeah, they really are. And it actually really surprised us as a research team, the degree to which Gen Z or Gen Z are engaging with these practices. So Australia is a very interesting place. I've literally just come back. This is a field trip that I have dreamt of doing for like so many years, to a little island off the north coast of Australia called Christmas Island, which has the highest percentage of Buddhists in the whole of Australia because of generations of migration from China and through Southeast Asia of Buddhists, Taoists, Confucianists, like dating back to the 1800s, late 1800s. And this is and I am going to answer your question, but this is important for context, is that Australia's geographical proximity to Asia and our long history of migration from Asia, bringing Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism to Islam, of course, to Australia, means that there's sort of, my hypothesis is that there's a more openness to some of these ideas in Australia. And it certainly comes up in the data on Gen Z or Gen Z. So yeah, they practice meditation, like they widely practice meditation. They're into yoga. There's been a dramatic increase in the uptake of meditation and also yoga among Gen Z compared to Gen Y. And the other thing that comes up really, it's really interesting, is really high percentages of them believe in karma in particular, and also reincarnation. So something like karma, I mean, that's a whole nother course. And, you know, I have some issues with the concept of karma actually when it's taken to mean, you know, like when it's seen as individual and over lifetimes, which kind of doesn't fit to me with this whole idea that we're all interconnected, and that, you know, I think in a way we probably more have sort of collective karma. So anyway, I don't want to go too far down the karma rabbit hole. We do talk about it a little bit around the course, but I just want to name there are some problematic things about karma. But what I think what they believe karma to be is more in a sort of, it's in pop culture as well as in the Asian philosophies, this sort of thing that you have to watch kind of what you do. In a way, their view of karma like goes back to the Eightfold Path. It's something that sort of makes them more ethical, you know. They are also, some of them are vegetarian, some of them are vegan, some of them are involved in environmental activism. And that, for some of them, that is linked to, say, some kind of Buddhist practices. Others, it's more linked to a spiritual kind of understanding more generally, including this thing of karma and ethics, the importance of ethics. But also it's linked to nature connection. Nature connection is really high. The importance of nature connection among these young Australians. And that nature connection is also stimulates this, and that's why I love this phrase, compassionate responsiveness, because the more connected they feel to nature, the more they also want to do things to protect nature, you know, and to not harm nature. So again, going back to that second point in the Eightfold Path, this right resolve, it makes them decide, I don't want to harm anyone. I really want to reduce my potential to harm anyone. So I'm going to be vegan, or I'm going to go to a environmental action in order to protect that which I love and that which I feel part of and connected to. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. One of the things I appreciate about your work too, Anna, is, and it's with regard to this question, is that you're both connected with the text, the tradition, the teaching, the practice, but also studying with these communities, these living communities, and understanding them. And so I'm so appreciative that Agni asked that question and that you were able to answer it, because this is happening in a real world, and particularly for you being in Australia, a world that we aren't often exposed to in our scholarship when we're studying, for example, the Jain tradition. And so it really kind of brings that to life for us here to show it in action and working. Maybe I can ask you one final question. We have a few more minutes. And I'm trying to relate this also to Jainism, because there's so many shared principles across these two traditions. Obviously, we know that they're Shramana traditions and they're connected in ancient India, and there's so much common ground. And one of the things that I wonder listening, and it goes back to the original question I asked, is with regard to ethical practice. You mentioned some of these people are going vegan, vegetarian, going into environmental activism. They don't want to harm nature and all these things, and that's great. And so there is a kind of ethical practice involved in this non-action, so to speak, of maybe even if it's individualized practice of withdrawing one's harm they inflict on the world, for example. And so I'm thinking of ahimsa right now as a kind of grounding principle between the two traditions. I'm curious, in the traditions that you're teaching in the course, in Buddhism specifically, how is that ethical practice important or not within the broader practice of non-action that you're describing? And again, with the parentheses around it, is that ethical practice part of having that experience where you're not doing anything? Does that make sense? I see a kind of tension there, and I'm really curious to know.
Yeah, and I think this is what the debate is often around. Like the debate is often around the fact that if you believe in kind of spontaneous enlightenment, then maybe you have less effort on ethicality, you know, because you have less effort, like less attention to ethical. This is the misperception. You have less attention to ethicality because you think you can just sit there and it'll sort of spontaneously happen, that you have to then not be as careful about what you do or not do. But actually in the text, Longchenpa says, you know, don't for any one moment kind of think that you don't have to be sort of careful, you know, like, so it's just, I think this potential for spontaneous liberation, I think, is very important because, again, it kind of connects you. Like if you really believe, and the third noble truth, you know, if you really, really do believe in this sense that the universe is all good and that the universe is all of these positive qualities and that you yourself and everyone, all beings within them have that positive quality, then as Longchenpa says, like at any moment, like you could just sort of realize that, you know, and that would just be life transforming. But we still stay human and we still stay in this sort of, you know, appearance of dualistic reality. So you still have to, but it's like, it's beautiful. You catch yourself when you're talking about it. It's not even you have to. You don't even have to. It stops being a have to because it will just naturally happen. That ethicality, when you kind of awake to the ground of being, that ethicality naturally arises, and that you just naturally wouldn't want to harm anyone, or at least to really minimize your harm. Being human, you know, I remember a Buddhist teacher telling me it's like it's kind of impossible to not cause any suffering at all. You know, we do need to eat, you know, even if we're not eating animals, we're still, you know, like there is a level of harm that can still happen. But, you know, you want to minimize that. You really want to minimize whatever harm you can do to others and try and be of benefit to all beings. And I think I share this beautiful poetry because I really think this text, it's just so profound at like just simply pointing to it and just reminding us that, you know, really the other key thing in practice or non-practice is to minimize distraction, right? Like you're just minimizing distractions and you're not getting caught up in grasping on to too many things, too many desires, too many needs, too many wants, too many, you know, which is again why there is this emphasis of withdrawing into a quiet space, or at least, like, you know, if you can, into a natural space, to be free of so much of the distraction of modern life. So those reminders, I think, are there because if you can just make that time, even just, you know, 5 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day or whatever, to just minimize distraction and rest and remember remember that true nature and remember who you are. And of course, if you have been fortunate enough to have a kind of spiritual experience, like a taste of it, it helps because you can then recall it. You've got something to, you know, when I'm meditating, I can literally recall that state that I, you know, had experience I had when I was young, and then can sort of return to it. But my instruction to everyone here is like, it doesn't have to be some like mind-blowing spiritual experience. It could be any connection with that you feel with a beautiful place, any memory of a beautiful natural setting, any memory of the love. And we go through this in our more practical kind of course that gives you these tips and ideas and is a little bit more conversational. I wanted to start with the poetry to really set the scene, but then know that in the course, you know, it's really very accessible. There's ways that we can do this, techniques for doing this, where you can just recall the love you have for your partner or for your dog or for your mother or whoever. Like, so yeah, it's recalling this love, recalling this compassion, remembering it's our true nature, and then just giving ourselves time to rest in it, just to be in it, which then through the non-doing makes our doing more compassionate and responsive in return. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. And I think those details and nuances are so incredibly important and really point to why it's so important to study these traditions in their complexity and their totality in the way that you have in an hour gone over so in so much detail and so well. So we truly appreciate this. We truly appreciate that you've taught this course, given this wonderful talk, did the podcast with us, and contributed Buddhism to the Compassion Studies Initiative, because of course Buddhism is one of the kind of cornerstones of the practice of compassion. So we look forward to launching your course soon, and we do thank you deeply for spending the time with us, especially so early there in Australia.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, I will now turn it over to Deanna, who's going to say a few last words and wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller, and thank you so much, Dr. Halafoff. It's really a delight to hear your presentation and also behind the scenes be working on your course, which will be launching in just a few short weeks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our last Voices in Compassion Studies talk with Dr. Halafoff. And at Arihanta Institute, we are deeply grateful for the opportunity to share her extensive scholarship and to reflect on how we can foster a more compassionate society through practice and the awareness of our interconnection. So this does wrap up our Voices in Compassion Studies speaker series for 2025. We do invite you to visit our website and sign up for Arihanta Institute's newsletter to find out about what's to come in 2026. So all our very best to you, and we hope to see you again very soon. Jai Jinendra.